I thought I already had that video on.
Hello, we're trying this again.
Take 2.
So hopefully we don't have any connectivity issues. So we'll just jump into it then.
So welcome.
We're a little late today.
That's my fault completely.
But you can watch this on your lunch break, so
there you go.
Let us know if
For
that's
those of you
something
who
that
have a
you
lunch
enjoy.
break.
Yeah,
So that's a good thing.
I do not have a lunch break.
You know, you gotta talk to your union steward about that. See what you can do. So.
Every time I hear the word union now, I've been watching Hamilton too much. So
all right, gotcha. They had some conflict in Hamilton.
they had quite a bit of conflict in Hamilton
Because
it was totally historically accurate.
They didn't always choose their battles wisely.
They did not.
So.
How is that gonna wrap up in what we're talking about
Well,
today?
you want to make sure that you're wise in choosing your battles. You don't always have to have a duel with Aaron Burr. So.
You have a duel with Aaron Burr once, and that's
or
about
with
all it
Raymond
takes.
Burr. You don't have to have a duel with him either.
I don't know who that is. Is it a sports person?
No, that is Perry Mason.
Oh.
Yeah, so.
I see those on Hallmark coming up, and I just don't watch them. I don't like mysteries. Is that weird? My mom really likes mysteries.
Yeah,
I'm not a mystery.
They have a whole
fan.
channel for that with Hallmark.
I know.
So.
I like the movies part, but not the mysteries part.
There's no mystery to the.
Well, I figure,
romance movies there.
in the romance movies, you know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So in the mystery movies, you probably know what's going to happen too.
So do you fight with your mom over what you get to watch?
I don't live with my mom, so
Oh, but don't you guys ever watch movies together?
not as much anymore. Now I feel bad.
Wow.
Mom, I'll come over and bring
She
the
probably
popcorn.
feels lonely and isolated, disconnected in the midst of COVID-19.
That's a danger for
should write an
senior. That's a
article
danger
about
for
that.
senior citizens. I've written
Especially if their kids neglect them and don't
I've
watch
written
movies
many
with them, so.
I've written many an article about the mental health dangers of COVID-19, especially on senior citizens.
Yeah.
Not that I'm calling my mom a senior citizen, but technically she is.
But you wouldn't
welcome,
call her that.
but I wouldn't call her that to her face.
Not twice. She'll go all Aaron Burr on you.
Because then I'm not going to be here next week. So we would have to handle that conflict a little bit better.
Yes, we would. You need to choose your battles wisely.
Okay.
So, which is actually
Don't argue with your mom.
exactly what effective servants of Christ do. They choose their battles wisely. And we see that demonstrated in what Paul in particular, he's the central character here, but he and Silas in Acts chapter 16 are moving forward. And as they do that, they've separated from Barnabas and Mark. But immediately, next paragraph, Paul decides to pick up a young protege named Timothy, who has a really good reputation in the areas surrounding his hometown. They get to Lystra, and my guess is that they already knew each other from coming through before. And anyway, the reputation Timothy has is good. We know from other things in his writings to Timothy later that he deals with some personal weaknesses, as we all do. For him, it's timidity and some health issues, which is interesting because Mark deserted him. So many commentators have kind of made the remark that Paul doesn't want to deal with somebody who's fearful or timid, and then he picks up Timothy right after this. So there's some strange happenings afoot here with Paul, because not only does he pick up Timothy, but Timothy comes from a mixed home where his mother is a Jewish believer and his father is ostensibly not a believer, and more specifically is a Gentile, is a Greek. Mm-hmm. And so Paul, for the sake of the Jews in the area, to avoid conflict, has Timothy circumcised, which seems to fly in the face of everything that he just had conflict about previously.
Right.
And so even in this very paragraph, he has him circumcised for the sake of the Jews, and then they go about delivering the Jerusalem Council letter and the instructions, which specifically say you don't need to be circumcised. So
what is Timothy thinking then? Like, hey man.
That's a good question.
Hey man. Why?
He's probably thinking, ow.
Well,
but
I didn't go there.
There's a lot of, I probably shouldn't have. But
But wouldn't that be your first, if you were Timothy, would you be like, wait?
I feel pretty certain about it, that Paul would have gone to great lengths to explain to him why
Sure,
we're
right.
not violating conscience by doing this, especially considering how strongly Paul feels about it, as evidenced by his New Testament letters to other churches saying, do not do this. Well, why not? Well, because they're doing it, caving into the legalism, to falling into this ritualistic idea of what it means to be a Christ follower. At the same time, I think it's consistent with what Paul would say through the rest of those things. Even, I think, if he were talking to the other churches, and this is me speculating, even if he were talking to other churches about circumcision, he would take the same approach as he does in 2 Corinthians 9. Follow my example as I follow Christ, but I'm going to do anything I can to reach as many people as I can. So if I'm dealing with Jews, I'm going to approach that as a Jew. If I'm dealing with Gentiles, I'm going to approach that as a Gentile. In our day, we could see this as, if I'm dealing with educated folks, I'm going to speak intellectually. If I'm dealing with a person on the street, I'm going to kind of tailor that conversation the way I approach it to what fits there. If I'm dealing with people from a particular ethnic background, of a particular, political persuasion, if I'm talking to a male or female, I'm going to tailor how I approach that. I'm not going to violate conscience, compromise truth, but there are just certain things that we do, and I think we understand that just from basic courtesy and relationships.
Right.
You don't talk to your grandmother the same way you talk to your sister.
Right.
It's two different relationships, and so it's a lot like that. And Paul says to the Corinthian church, "Look, I'm going to do whatever it takes to try to connect with as many people as possible." Later in Acts, we see Paul go to he's in Athens, and he goes to this discussion or debate. They sit around and listen to wise people saying wise things. I just saw a Dick Van Dyke episode similar to that last night, which is hilarious, but totally irrelevant to what we're talking about. Anyhow, and he goes and he approaches them from a perspective they can understand. I see you're very religious. Let me talk to you about this idol, this statue you have here, honoring an unknown God. Let me tell you about this God that you don't know. You recognize that there's a God here that is unnamed. Let me put a name on that for you. And then he goes in and describes it and talks about it. And some are mocking him, and some are excited to hear more. And so he engages in conversation in the cultural context that is fitting there. And so we want to always make sure, as we're presenting the gospel, and this is what Paul does so well, that we don't change, we don't compromise the gospel, but there is an element of contextualization that we want to make sure we're always aware of. We want to think in terms of our hearers. So if I'm talking to a men's group, I'm going to speak differently than to a women's group.
You want to read the room, essentially.
For sure, yeah. And the level of authority in the relationship then dictates how we go about that. So, I might talk to my daughter differently than I would talk to, another kid on the street. I'm going to talk to you differently because of our relationship than I might talk to, some other single mom that I know in town. We're just not going to have the same kinds of conversations, even though the truth doesn't change, the reality doesn't change. I don't want to hedge on that. And this is kind of the difficulty that we've seen in American evangelicalism in debates over seeker-driven churches. They very often use the term seeker-sensitive these days as equivalent to what we used to call seeker-driven. And I don't think those are necessarily the same things, but when we start trying to tailor the church service, we start trying to package the message specifically to appease the flesh, to cater to the cultural context. Therefore, we just kind of throw away accepted traditions, we throw away societal norms, we throw away any number of things. And we can do that to a certain extent, and while some would argue the slippery slope applies there, and I think very often it does, there's a line that we cross at a certain point. We can make those adjustments We're a little more contemporary than some other churches and less contemporary than others. And we think we've hit kind of or I don't know if we've done it super well, but we've been trying to sort of hit the sweet spot. And when we started Real Life in 2003, we kind of came from the approach that we can't, if we're trying to reach the community as a particularly missional church, not really a church plant because we didn't come from somewhere else, but as a new church, it was important for us to be able to speak to people where they are, right? So we kind of, if I can use the phrase, marketed ourselves, and I don't mean to be crass or secular, but as we were publicizing the work, the phrase kind of stuck with us whether we chose it or not, that we were kind of the church for people who don't like church. And so I don't know that I love that now, and I don't know that I would say that
a certain
now,
thing pops into your head when you think that.
But yeah, that was, so we knew if we tried, because we'd been seeing through the 90s people doing what was known as blended worship, where you kind of do you do some songs to appease the older crowd. You do your traditional thing, and in fact, the church that we came from, they did this. So we had the pianist and organist play for a couple of hymns, and then they'd stop, and the pastor would bring out his guitars, and everybody would take out their praise book or whatever they called it at the time, little paperback hymnal type thing, and then you'd sing these more contemporary courses. So when I say contemporary, they're like the 70s, but you know what I'm saying. And so
it's like a hymn from the 1800s to compare.
And so we were seeing that in churches around the way.
Right.
And so even here locally, one of our local churches that we do some things with, divided into two services. They had their,
I've
I
seen
think
that.
One of them was, they called it Wellspring service. I don't know something like that, where they had a contemporary early service and a traditional later service, those kinds of things. And what ended up happening is you create more division than anything else.
Right.
By trying to appease everyone, inevitably it failed. And so I think what we do here would rightly be described as blended worship, primarily because we're not trying to appease anybody. Here's what seems to fit us. We want, make an effort to make sure that we are working older hymns into our stuff.
Even if we do them in a different way.
Right.
Largely
because content matters.
Right.
And the content is so strong in many of those old hymns. There are some garbage hymns too. Don't get me wrong. That there are hymns that are well known that maybe have some bad doctrine in them. So we either avoid those or we change them.
And there are contemporary pieces that have that.
Absolutely, we do that now. We do that with there's a number of Hillsong things that we've done.
We've changed the words on, or whatever.
We won't. I feel like Kanye. We won't do that song with those lyrics.
Right.
We might change them. You can silence my phone if it's acting dumb over there. And when I say acting dumb, I mean doing what it's supposed to do. Anyhow, so we'll take a song and just completely rewrite a verse for it, like "What a Beautiful Name," which is a fantastic song, but the second verse is heretical to say that Jesus came to earth because he didn't want heaven without us.
He was lonely.
God is insufficient until we fill that need. We complete him. What a horrible, horrible concept in an otherwise beautiful and sound song. So we just rewrote it to reflect the fullness of God in himself, and we're not trying to fight over it. And we've talked about reckless love became a point of contention in the church where people were freaking out because you used the word reckless, and God's not reckless. Yeah, okay, but there is a certain amount of poetic license you go with it too. Now, we've never done that song. I don't know if we ever will, because the moment's a little bit past. I don't know how timeless that song will prove to be.
It was like the shock value of it.
But there's a beautiful element of that, in the same way that we talk about recklessness and extravagance in so many sermons preaching about the woman anointing Jesus' feet with expensive perfume, and how extravagant, and of course people are up in arms, Judas in particular. Well, that's the same kind of recklessness that he's talking about in that song. I don't know the man that wrote it. He's from Kalamazoo, but I don't know him personally. I have no idea where he's at in his personal approach to it. But that I didn't ever think about that being
I didn't do that.
calling God reckless until somebody brought it up. We're not looking to have a rehashing of the 80s and 90s worship wars. That's not a place that we want to fight. That's not it's not right for us to do that. But there are places, to get back to what we're talking about, because I kind of took a side road there. There are places that we do have to stand and fight, that the church has to put their foot down. And recently, we've seen Grace Community Church in California, John MacArthur's church, all over the news, because they came to a place where they've changed their position. They've taken a stand. Governor Newsom changed some of his restrictions. They felt like they were being targeted and oppressed. And they said, we will kneel to Christ and not to Caesar. And so they publicly announced, we are doing this. Yes, we are defying the order. We're exercising civil disobedience and meeting as a church. And there's debate as to whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing. That's for somebody else to decide. But they felt, the elders of Grace felt, that it was necessary now. Having said straight along, we need to submit to the authorities, we need to go along with these things. Now they've gone too far. We have to put our foot down. We have to stop and fight. I think that's an appropriate understanding of what we're called to as Christians. When we see what Paul says to the Romans about submitting to authority, which has been abused over the years, it has been ignored over the years, it's been, the devil loves that pendulum swing. So we've seen that used to justify slavery. Don't stand against it. It's the law of the land. Submit to the authorities. We've seen that used to justify not fighting against abortion. It's the law of the land. We've also seen that used to even justify things like misogyny and sexual abuse or domestic violence in the home. That you have been called to submit to your husband, therefore you have no business to stand up here. Those are all abuses of the scripture, and the weight of the text, the direction of the author's thought does not bear that. It doesn't support that at all. But people have gone that far. So then we go the other way, and it's like, well, no, we just have to ignore it. We're going to throw it away. Well, we're going to align ourselves as Christ followers with American revolutionary values, that we're gonna protest, we're gonna fight. Nobody can tell me what to do. Don't tread on me, and all that kind of stuff. I saw a thing yesterday from a pastor I respect, who basically was talking about their political homelessness. To be politically homeless is really a pretty good place to be as a Christ follower. I don't know if I entirely agree with it, but the thought was in a positive direction. If I am aligned or allied with a particular political party, to the extent that I compromise my biblical convictions and I become a Democrat or a Republican more strongly than I am a Christ follower, then I have thrown it away.
And today it seems that's so where people are. Absolutely. You are extremely this or extremely that, and you're all in.
And if you are a part of this party or that party, whichever is the opposite party of me, then you can't be saved. You're obviously not a good person. You're not a Christian if we disagree. Well, that's the wrong kind of conflict, and particularly in the church, that just doesn't make any sense. And Paul goes to great lengths throughout his letters to echo that sentiment, to say, look, we're brothers, we're sisters, we are united by Christ. All of the stuff of this world, however important it is now, here in this moment, it's all going to burn up. We're not here for that. We don't belong here. We're not citizens of this world. And I think that's probably a big part of why he uses that particular phrasing and hammers this idea that as Christ followers, we are aliens and strangers in this world. We're here, but as the old spiritual says, we're just to pass it through. We're not part of it. We're in it, but we're not of it. That doesn't preclude civic responsibility. It doesn't keep us from voting and acting in a positive way to effect change, for sure. But we have to understand that all the change in this world, everything that we can possibly do in a social setting, in a justice setting, is still meaningless apart from Christ. If we eradicate racism in the United States completely, and we do it from a secular perspective, and we miss the gospel, that's all a waste of time. Mm-hmm. So the reality of life, and this is the biblical and Christian worldview, the reality of life finds itself in Christ, in the reality of God. So we must then connect, as we say here, the reality of God to the realities of life. The reality of God then trumps all of our everyday realities because they're temporary.
Right. And when we were, a couple years ago or however long it's been now, when we were coming up with that little, catchphrase or slogan or whatever, we talked about that. I'm not sure if we actually talked about it on the podcast, but you and I talked about it, that there is one reality with God and so many realities, quote unquote, in life.
Yeah, experiences.
Right. And that's really the better word for it. Yeah. But people get invested so deeply in those experiences that we've said this before in the podcast, that we'll say like my reality, my truth, my whatever. But it's so easy to get tangled up in those realities. And when you think about it, that one reality is God. Yeah. And so when you think about things from that perspective, it makes you realize, wow, getting into these conflicts is really kind of dumb. But it doesn't stop you from doing it again and again and again, myself included.
Well, and that's why it's important for us to learn how to think like Christ so that we can choose our battles wisely. And when we look at Paul, very often he gets portrayed as this very harsh, stern, it's my way or the highway kind of guy. And there are times when that's absolutely true. Mm-hmm. And the exact same thing can and should be said about Jesus. There are times when Jesus breaks out the whip and overturns the tables. There are times when he calls the Pharisees a brood of vipers. There are times when he says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." That's kind of harsh,
right?
Never
see, correct me if I'm wrong, because most people have this image of this, kind, gentle, loving Jesus, which, yes, accurate, but
partial.
But you never see Jesus get walked all over. Like, nobody's gonna, he's not laying down like a doormat.
Other than, not because of weakness, anyway.
Right, so that's what I mean.
He certainly does that when he allows himself to be crucified.
Well, sure.
But
he knows what he's doing. I'm saying he knows what he's doing. He's not just like, yeah, you win.
I was introducing my daughter to the 80s sitcom Perfect Strangers, which is absolutely well worth watching.
Wow, that takes me back.
Oh, man,
why can't I remember the guy's name?
The character or the actor? Bronson Pinchot played Balky.
Balky.
And it was pretty hilarious.
I used to watch that.
So Cousin Larry, they're in Chicago, and he's teaching Balky, who's super innocent, from the Mediterranean island of Mypos. And he's just letting everybody take advantage of him all the time. And so Larry is trying to teach him not to be naive. And in the process, hilarious hijinks ensue. But
as they do.
But what ends up happening is there comes out a delineation between naivete and allowing yourself to get walked on and choosing to do for others, choosing to serve others. We don't want to be jaded. We don't want to be naive. We want to be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. We need to recognize that sometimes doing everything somebody wants is not helpful to them.
Right.
But the reality is, Jesus calls his followers to make themselves servants, slaves of everyone. If you want to be first in the kingdom, you need to make yourself last. You need to put everybody else ahead of yourself, which sometimes looks like, from a worldly perspective, being a doormat. Mm-hmm. Why are you putting up with that? Why do you let them do that? And we need to be able to, whether we answer with our mouths to others, we don't always have to justify our behaviors. But we need to be able to answer in our minds to ourselves and to the Lord, here's why I do this. When I tolerate this injustice against me, why do I do that? I do that out of reverence for Christ. I do that so that I can, in turning the other cheek, be an example of Christ to the world. If it's just that I don't have the spine to stand up, then that's not a picture of Christ. Right. Because he absolutely stood up when that was the thing to do, to defend the glory and honor of the Lord. He's consumed with the zeal of the Lord. Same thing with Paul. Paul, who by his own description becomes sort of a chameleon. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to be all things to all people so that by all means I might win some. Because if I don't, people die and go to hell. And it's too important for me to get hung up on my preferences, my cultural expectations, or what feels good to me, or my comfort zone, all that kind of stuff. No, none of that. I'm throwing all of that away. All of my comforts in this world, all of my reputation, my pride, I count all of that garbage, manure, lost. It's got to go, because the only thing that matters is Christ. The only thing that matters is for me to live for others for the sake of the Lord. And if I can do that, then that's the difference between being blindly taken advantage of and choosing to serve others as you do that. And so as we look at how Paul makes that distinction, how do I know the difference? For us, we need to know that. How does he do that? And really, it comes down to thinking like Christ. We need to have the mind of Christ. We need to consider things from a heavenly, divine perspective. And so, if I'm going to choose wisely in the battles that I face, and we are going to face battles, I need to prioritize the glory of God. I need to do everything I do for God's glory. I need to do the same thing that Jesus did. If I have to suffer for the sake of God being glorified, awesome. Bring it. I'm going to do that. I need to prioritize the good of others. Romans 14:19 says, make every effort. What we want to do is to make every effort to live in a way that promotes peace, mutual edification. We're going to build others up. We want to be working in such a way that we are doing good, sharing with others, living in a way that pleases God, because we are modeling what Jesus did. We're reflecting the reality of who he is and what he did for us through the relationships that we have. We need to prioritize the significance of eternity, not get caught up in all the stuff now. Today as we're talking, it's primary election day here. And so, I'm going to go vote. Mm-hmm. What I'm not going to do is get caught up in fights and arguments about, who and what and whatever. Because all of those things they pale in comparison mm-hmm. to the gospel. And along that line, I have friends who have run for office. I have people that I feel very strongly about supporting in office. But we made a decision a long time ago when we started the church, because I'm a pastor and recognized as if I could say, a public Christian, which we should all be, but anyway, I think we all know where we're going. We won't put anybody's campaign signs and any political signs in our yard. It doesn't matter. You could be running against Mussolini or Hitler or whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to do anything that, because of a sign, when somebody drives by the house or is walking their dog on the street and they form an opinion mm-hmm. about the people living there. Now, I'm not going to that church because they stand for that. Well, you don't know. Right. From a sign. Right. You think you know, but you don't know. Right. So we need to be able to have a conversation. If we're talking about it, I'll absolutely support whoever it is that I choose to support. I can talk about my friends that are running for office right. and so on. Because we can then have a conversation. And that removes unnecessary obstacles to faith. That's what Paul's doing here by having Timothy circumcised, right. is removing unnecessary obstacles so that we can get to the heart of the matter.
Because someone was going to be like, well, Timothy's not circumcised.
Well, absolutely. Right. And they've been seeing that right. over and over again. You're getting stoned and kicked out over upsetting the apple
So he's just like, all right, let's get this out of the way, because it's drawing attention that it doesn't need to draw.
Exactly. So now, people know he's a Greek. They're going to ask, right. well, does he identify Greek or does he identify Jewish believer? Which it's funny. When I use those terms, it sounds like something we're talking about here today. Right. But that's absolutely what they were talking about there.
Nothing new.
So you've got both of these things right. in you. How do you see
because
yourself?
instantly, if he chooses one or the other, if he says one or the other, those people are going to form an opinion.
Right.
One way or another.
And it's the same reason that we are a community church, not part of a denomination. Because as soon as we put a denominational
People think a
label,
certain way.
if this was Real Life Presbyterian Church or Baptist Church or Methodist Church or whatever it is, or Lutheran Church.
You even told a joke about that a couple weeks ago.
Did I?
About someone pushing a guy off a bridge.
No, oh yeah. We get these labels and these categories, and so once we do that, then we create in our minds and our hearts a caricature of that person. We don't see them for the person; we see them for the thing. For
Not just religious affiliations, but pretty much anything.
Right.
Anything.
So because of that, Paul removes that unnecessary obstacle by saying, "Look, circumcision isn't anything. For the sake of the ministry, we're going to do this." Hudson Taylor did the same thing when he began the China Inland Mission, and it became the most successful and prominent mission in East Asia. And so as he's doing this, along the way, he didn't start this way, but along the way, he recognized we're going to be able to connect with these people more if we can relate to them where they are. So he began to assimilate to their culture, dressed like a Chinese person, grew out I keep seeing it called a pigtail, but there's a Chinese word for it. I don't know what it is. Growing all that out.
It's probably not pigtail.
I think that's the English word for it. That's actually
that's what we can associate
appropriate, I guess. But however it is, he assimilated that so much so that you're speaking their language, you're following their culture. Why? Because the culture doesn't matter in reality, but it matters to that person that you're talking to. So let's strip this down. What ultimately matters is they have to know Christ. They don't have to look English. They don't have to be, as the imperialists would say, civilized. We don't have to bring them into our culture, but they have to know Christ to be able to face eternity.
So let me come to them, to their way of
dramatic difference, as far as how that was handled. So, when we recognize the significance of eternity as a priority, that helps us decide, is this a battle worth fighting or is it not? Do I need to, when I go into this culture, do I need to have Sunday school offered in English? Right. Well, of course not. I need to do what it takes to connect the reality of God to the realities of life.
In fact, you'd probably meet more resistance if you did that.
Precisely. So the more I can do to stop promoting these earthly things,
especially Western
and promote
culture.
Eternal things, and right now in particular, those things are going to help me be able to figure it out. So the glory of God, the good of others, the significance of eternity, and lastly, I need to prioritize the urgency of the gospel. Now, there are probably other things that we can look at along with these, but these four we see here in Paul's life. We see it demonstrated in Christ's life. We see the teachings of both. And the urgency of the gospel, because of the significance of others, of eternity. When we're focused on the glory of God, we're focused on the good of other people, doing the loving thing for them as an expression of our love for God. And we recognize that eternity is eternal. It's forever.
You can't even wrap your head around it.
Right. I mean, this is whatever's going on now.
Right.
This is the title page of the great novel. And why would you get hung up on just the title? This book really isn't that good. It's just, you're on the title page, man. Read the book. Well, we need to bring people into eternity. Well, how do we do that? We do that through the gospel. We bring them to the truth to recognize that there's only this life here for a moment. And then only our life in Christ will survive that. We're all going to die. We're all going to face judgment. Some of us in Christ will receive grace. The rest of us outside of Christ will receive condemnation. That's worth fighting about. That's worth taking a stand and say, okay, if you're gonna persecute me, okay, no problem. We'll take that conflict because it's too important. But I'm not gonna if it's not dealing with one of these four things, then I want to be real careful. I want to be loath to enter into conflict over pointless things. So that's that.
And we'll stop there because we're already over. Man,
of course.
It's funny how that works. But thank you guys for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Peace.
See ya.